So it's great to have somebody as knowledgeable and insightful as Csaba. So Csaba he divides his time between Berlin, Jerusalem, and Montreal. He's a good friend of BGU and has wonderful insights on the Israeli election. So Csaba, have at it, please.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Thank you for the warm introduction and the welcoming back. It's many of you, some of you we met before at earlier board meetings when I was invited to say a few words, and it's always really so special and such a pleasure. So thank you, Peggy, and thank you, Simon. So I will not take much of your time, but we can take as long as you have, because certainly thinking about the Israeli election is something that certainly gives me a professional bread and butter, and also as a concerned citizen, as a concerned observer, it's something that's very close and dear to my heart. So I will try to structure my reflections and my comments around some of the main points that pertain to the process as it unfolds right now. And I will weave into it some of my own personal encounters and personal experiences with earlier parts of the electoral process. Because, and this is one important takeaway I think to remember, unlike our Canadian or local Quebec elections, and we just had one not such a long time ago, Israeli elections are very long. The electoral process in Quebec, provincially or federally in Canada, they are chick-chock, they are over usually in a month. But in Israel, the normal electoral period is 90 days plus. This time, it's worked out with the calendar and with the Hagim. It actually was quite a bit longer than that. So it is a long electoral process, which gives a lot of opportunities for political parties to strategize, for political parties to learn from mistakes along the way. It's also, of course, a process that generates voter fatigue very easily, as it certainly does in Israel. Now, you may have seen in some of the social media or online discussions that according to some, the actual campaign is only about to start now. Now that the Hagim are over, really there is nothing else to worry about for the Israeli citizens. Those who are in Israel. This is also a time when many Israelis are now thinking about coming home, some for professional reasons, but many in order to participate in the electoral exercise. So many of the things and points that I'm going to mention in the next few minutes may change quite dramatically over the next couple of weeks. So the election date is November 1st, and it's really only about a couple of days ahead, a couple of weeks ahead. The most important milestones that took place during the past 3.5 months, during the long electoral process, are already behind us. And the two important ones that I would like to mention first is the process by which Israeli political parties go about choosing their list of candidates. The Knesset has 120 seats, so every political party or every alliance, coalition of political parties, and I will flesh that out in a few minutes, can put together a list of no more than 120 seats. And this was already, there was a deadline for it, which already happened about a month and a half ago. But then Israeli political actors, parties, but also concerned citizens and organizations have an opportunity to launch their complaint and they actually file a protest with the Central Election Commission, which reports to the Knesset, if they think that particular candidates or entire party list should be barred from the election. And usually we see extreme right-wing political parties protesting against extreme left-wing political parties and vice versa. So in this particular case, there were a number of very high-profile cases and I will also mention them in more detail in a few minutes. Normally what happens is that the Central Election Commission may take a decision, pro or con, if the Central Election Commission were to bar a particular candidate or party from running in the election, normally the High Court reverses that decision. And one important party whose entire list was at stake was one of the Arab parties, Balad, which is one of the more radical pro-Palestinian of the four Arab parties that made up the joint list. This is the more radical one. And there was a complaint against Balad seeking for its disqualification. But as it was, I think, widely expected, the court reversed that decision. Okay, so this process is now behind us, and political parties really only need to focus on turning out their voters on election day. Now, in this election, which many people brand as the fifth election, indeed, over the last 3 years, we had 4 elections already. In April 2019, and then in September 2019, those elections didn't produce a government. The third and fourth election produced 2 short-lived governments. You might remember the last one, of course, was the coalition government led by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. In this electoral race, there are 3 blocks of parties to zero in on. And this is another important takeaway from this discussion, that as much as the electoral process is structured along party lines, political parties also align themselves into quite cohesive blocks. And in this election, the blocks have been quite closed. And this was one very, very important difference compared to the earlier elections, when at least in some of the political parties, one couldn't be so sure where exactly they would be lining up on election day. Right now, in this race, in this campaign, this is quite clear, with a couple of very, very small exceptions. So one important, the smallest of the 3 blocks that I would like to address is of course the Arab bloc of political parties, previously known as the Joint List, made up of 4 Arab political parties. As I mentioned, Balad, the more radical pro-Palestinian Israeli Arab party, the more moderate, more pragmatic Arab party called Tal, sort of branded and better known by one of its senior leaders, Ahmed Tibi. The third one is the binational party Hadash, the former communist party, which always has one Hebrew, one Jewish representative. Currently, it's a professor from the Hebrew University, Ofer Kasif. And the fourth one is Ra'am, the party largely mobilizing the Bedouin support from the Negev. And of course, this is the Arab political party that joined the last coalition. Now, what's very important about the joint list is that this time the 4 parties are not running together. And Ra'am obviously incurred the displeasure and the disfavor of its earlier coalition partners for having joined the government. According to all the polls, Balad, the more radical, the more extreme pro-Palestinian Arab party, is nowhere near meeting the threshold. So in terms of the Arab constituency, what we see is a remarkable division. There are 2 political parties, Hadash and Tal, so the Communist Party and the Pragmatic Party, running together in alliance, and we have Ra'am running on its own. And pundits expect that this division at the level of the Arab elites is likely to lead either to 2 possible impacts with respect to the Arab vote. One, it's going to dampen Arab turnout, and as a result of that, the likelihood of significantly reduced seat shares by the Arab parties in the Knesset is going to be another effect. And certainly, if that is going to be the case, while it's not clear which, if any, of the Arab parties might be available coalition partners of either of the other 2 blocs, this certainly doesn't bode well for the bloc currently led by Mr. Yair Lapid, which has a greater likelihood of attracting Arab support. So when it comes to the Arab political parties, we see division, and the expectation is dampened turnout and reduced seat share for the Arab parties. The second bloc to zero in on is the change bloc, the bloc that wanted to change and bring an end the decade-long rule of former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And this is the change bloc that, of course, brings together the 8 political parties, the 1 Arab and the 7 Jewish political parties. And this bloc is led by Mr. Yair Lapid. Now, what is important to note is that with the exception of Yair Lapid's party, which is doing very well at the polls, and it increased significantly its expected seat share. At the beginning of the electoral campaign process, pundits were giving it between 16 to 18 votes. Now, according to the last polls, Yair Lapid is polling, and Yesh Atid, so the Prime Minister's party, is polling in the neighborhood of 25 seats. What's interesting to see is that these votes seem to be coming from other members of the same bloc. So these are not votes that are gained by the bloc from the right. These are votes that migrated. This is support that's migrating to the Prime Minister's party from some of the other members of the Change bloc. Now, when it comes to a number of other members of the Change bloc, of the Prime Minister's bloc of parties, we see a remarkable degree of instability. So look, for example, at the party called Blue and White, which is not running in this election on this label. Currently in this election, the party that was led by former alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz, who shared the split prime ministership, if you will, or the supposedly rotating prime ministership with Benjamin Netanyahu after the third election. So Benny Gantz is joined in this election hands with Gideon Sa'ar, who was a former member of Likud and a member of the Change bloc, but realizing that running separately, they will likely not do as well as together, the two politicians decided to form an electoral coalition, and now they are running on a joint slate. Now, it's important to note that this joint slate of the two parties, so Gideon Sa'ar's and Benny Gantz's state, also includes a number, just to indicate the remarkable degree of instability in the Change bloc, it also includes a number of politicians who, until the end of the coalition government's term, were members of the party of the late Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Yamina. And Yamina, of course, Naftali Bennett's party was the great sacrifice, if you will, the greatest victim of this Change government, because as it just completely exploded by the end of the term of the government. And we see at least two important members of that party, Shirley Pinto and Matan Kahana, who are running as members of this Benny Gantz, Gideon Sa'ar team. So this is an important episode, I think, to highlight, because it illustrates the tremendous degree of instability, volatility, and division that characterizes several constituents of the Change bloc. And it doesn't stop here. Two of the political parties on the left flank of the Change bloc, the Labour Party, Avoda, and Meretz, sort of the more radical left-wing, secular left-wing party, had leadership and candidate elections during the summer months in order to choose their standard bearer and their candidates. Now, while Merav Michaeli, the leader of the Labour Party, retained quite easily her leadership at the helm of the Labour Party, the actual candidate list, so the realistic, the top seats, the top positions on the Avoda list changed dramatically. We see a number of, so there is new blood coming forward, but this of course also indicates, it just indicates also uncertainty. What's remarkable though is what happened with Meretz, where pretty much the entire ministerial team, the senior leadership of the party that represented that party in the coalition, just took a break from political life. And that paved the way for the return of Zahava Galon, who had already retired from electoral politics well before the 2019 elections, when this current cycle of instability started. And she came back trying to breathe new life into Meretz. Now, whether that's going to be successful or not, we don't know. Meretz desperately tried to form an electoral coalition with Avoda, with the Labour Party, which Merav Michaeli flatly refused, even though the leader of the Change bloc, Prime Minister Yair Lapid, also asked the two secular left-wing parties to try to come together and form a united bloc, thereby trying to rationalize and consolidate the alliance that he's trying to lead to victory. Now, when you add up the current seat projections, the change bloc is polling a little bit less, a little bit fewer votes than the opposition bloc of parties, depending on which station. And I will be showing you maybe just 2 illustrations in a moment. Depending on the polling station and depending on the news agency whose polling results you see, there may be 1 or 2, a few seats off. But there's consistency in giving the change bloc, so the current coalition, a few seats less than the opposition parties. And now let's come to the opposition parties. The opposition bloc is led by former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And what's very clear is that since the beginning of the electoral period, there has been no question about the fact that this bloc is going to be made up of 4 political parties, the same 4 political parties that ran a very merciless, if you will, but also very resolute opposition campaign in the Knesset during the whole year while the government was in power. The leader of the bloc is Likud, led by Benjamin Netanyahu. Unlike some of the other political parties in the change bloc, Netanyahu didn't have to face a leadership review in Likud, although there was an early challenge to his leadership from former Speaker of the Knesset, member of the Likud, Yuli Edelstein. He backed down, and Likud once again pulled together solidly behind the voter. Likud did have, however, a candidate primaries during the summer months. And I happened to be in Israel at the time, and I went to see the Likud primaries. So I picked up a whole bunch of leaflets that I'm going to show to my students tomorrow. And I'm very happy to share that a former Montrealer, Simon, I think you know him, also ran on the Likud, Danny Luz. He ran on the Likud list. He's currently a member of the Jerusalem City Council, and he did very well. He is in the 30s, I think 30s, he's the position 36. So depending on what happens on election day, he may actually become a Knesset member. Now, this was important. Likud is significantly still the largest party with the largest membership base. And the fact that Likud ran this national primary election in the summer gave the party a very strong and robust head start on the campaign trail. And the party hasn't stopped since then. Since July, Netanyahu and the rest of the team are literally in the fields, knocking on the doors and trying to turn out Likud voters. The central strategy, and here let me just show you the illustration that I wanted to bring in very, very quickly. The key strategy of the Likud campaign can be summarized with this image. Oops. 1 plus 1, 4. 1 plus 1 is 4. This doesn't make sense, right? I mean, maybe the Likudnikim lost their mind or they are so bad at math. No. And this is the message with which Netanyahu is traveling the country. 1 Likud member, 1 Likud voter who brings another Likud voter will give 4 years of Likud-led government. So this is a very powerful slogan. Clearly, the message is go and vote and bring another body with yourself. Likud calculated that in order to win a majority, a guaranteed majority, they need to turn out about 70,000 Likud supporters who did not vote. Not that they didn't vote Likud, who did not vote in the previous elections. And these were people who went on the beaches, who took it for granted that maybe Bibi can't lose, Bibi is the magician. This time that message is gone. And the message is everybody needs to bring 1 more person. And this seems to have generated quite interesting results in the fact that Likud is currently polling, depending on the channel, anywhere between 30 to 34 seats. So it still is the party that with significant margin is the largest. Now, the other 3 members of the four-member opposition bloc are the 2 ultra-Orthodox parties, the Sephardic Shas and the Ashkenazi Aguda, or United Torah Judaism Alliance. And there is really not much change in terms of their projected seat shares. These are well-established niche parties that can mobilize their respective ultra-Orthodox communities. But what's happening with the fourth constituent member of the coalition, and that's the religious Zionist coalition, that once upon a time Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked were leading, is remarkable. A gentleman, a lawyer by the name of Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is a leader of the former Kahanist party Otzma Yehudit, formed, and again, Netanyahu really played a very important role in making sure that Ben-Gvir's Otzma Yehudi will join hands with the religious Zionist party. They are running together, and they are doing insanely well at the polls. Some of the projections, as you'll see in a minute, are giving them about 14 seats. So that's unheard of in recent electoral history, to see the national religious community, the parties representing that community, doing so well. And here, Itamar Ben-Gvir's role, who literally and tirelessly is out there stirring up problems on Har HaBayit, on Temple Mount. Whenever there are clashes between Jews and Arabs, he is there. He is there to remind Jews of the importance of not relinquishing an inch of territory, of being tough and representing a strong, hardcore opposition to any kind of Arab violence or intimidation against the Jewish state and or the settlements, but not just. Ben-Gvir has emerged as a very charismatic leader, almost overshadowing Bezalel Smotrich, who is the leader of the other party with which he merged. And when you talk to taxi drivers, if you land in Tel Aviv and go towards Jerusalem, or not if you go to Tel Aviv, but if you take a taxi drive towards Jerusalem or the Shetachim, or even to the south, that's the message you hear. It's really quite incredible how often we heard that on our travels in Israel during the summer, that Ben-Gvir is the man. And of course, taxi drivers are not the only and the best indication of the feel in the streets, but they are certainly a good illustration. Now, just to close off, then let me show you quickly one more slide. It's not really a slide, but Channel 12 has this very nice election page where you can look at the last. You can build your own coalition. You can have all kinds of games if you'd like. You can also look at some of their predictions. So here, let me just show you how Channel 12, which is more, which is less, it's a channel that's less critical of the incumbent government. If it's a very centrist channel, but it's a little bit more critical of the opposition Netanyahu-led bloc than Channel 14, which I'm going to show you also in a moment. So look at the predictions. Channel 12 is giving Likud 30 seats today, to Yesh Atid, the Prime Minister's party, 25. And let me just zero in on the opposition. Otherwise, we can get lost easily in the numbers. So Likud gets 30. The National Religious Party, this is Ben-Gvir and Smotrich that I mentioned earlier, are polling 14, so that's 44. They are giving Shas 8, that's 52, and Aguda or Yahadut HaTorah 7, so that's already, where are we? That's 44, 52, so that's one seat short of the majority, that's 59. So we see it's very, very close. And if you add up the numbers for the change block, for Yair Lapid's block, it's just 2 seats short of that. Now let's look at how another TV channel, Channel 14, which is more favorable towards Netanyahu. And over the last weeks, Netanyahu and so the Likud and Yesh Atid, so the parties of the Prime Minister and the former Prime Minister, were trying to get the electoral involvement of the 2 TV stations barred, but because they charge them with being propaganda agencies rather than impartial public broadcasting agencies, these challenges didn't want even. But just take a look before I would end my reflections. That Channel 14, which is more pro-Likud and pro-opposition, is giving the Netanyahu bloc, is giving Netanyahu's party significantly more seats, 34 to a little bit less, so 12 to the National Religious Camp, so that's 46. Look at Shas, 9, so that's 55, and Yahadut HaTorah, 2, so that's already over the majority. So according to channel 14, there is expected already a majority that Netanyahu can expect. And 30 seconds, Simon, if you permit me, the thing to look out for is a party that I didn't mention, because the polling agencies are not mentioning them. Yet, this is the party that if you follow Likud, Netanyahu, or any of the Likud leaders on social media, they are zeroing in on this singular party to attack. And that is the party that is currently led by former Minister of the Interior, Ayelet Shaked, also better known as the former partner of Naftali Bennett, political partner that is. The party that they led together, Yamina, exploded. Naftali Bennett took a break from politics. Ayelet Shaked tried to form a new political alliance with Yoas Hendel, that didn't go anywhere. And then she decided to try to reform the party called Jewish Home, Habayit HaYehudi, that once upon a time in 2013 and 15, together with Naftali Bennett, they successfully led. Now, Ayelet Shaked profusely apologized to the right-wing voters for having entered the last government. And she promises left, right, and center that if she crosses the threshold, she will only support Netanyahu to be the next prime minister. Now, according to the polls, she is nowhere near the electoral threshold. She insists that she is. Netanyahu decided, and the Netanyahu team decided as of last night, as a matter of fact, not to entertain. There were voices in Likud that suggested that Netanyahu should call upon prospective right-wing voters to heed this call and vote for support Shaked, because together with her, the bloc might expand. But that didn't prevail. And the strategy that Likud is going to push for the next 2 weeks until November 1st is to wage a relentless attack against Shaked and tell the right-wing voters that any vote cast for Ayelet Shaked and Habayit HaYehudi, the Jewish Home, is a vote that's wasted, that is going to, because they are not going to cross the threshold, those are votes that are going to be wasted, so those votes should go to Likud or the Religious Zionist Party. So this is very interesting. According to the current polls, Ayelet Shaked is far from the threshold, but she's still polling about 1.5%. Is that 1.5% going to make the difference for Netanyahu to miss out on winning a majority? It can be. But this is going to be a very important thing to look out for in the next 2 weeks. So please remember, watch and zero in on the Netanyahu-Ayelet Shaked clash and division. Thank you so much, Simon.
Oh my goodness, Csaba, I mean, I'm breathless from all the information you just imparted. We have some time for questions, and I'm going to take advantage and ask the first question, because Csaba, when we spoke recently and we talked about the threshold, and I was saying, like, why don't they raise the threshold higher? I mean, they raised it for the last election, and you said, no, Peggy, I would have preferred if they went back and made it even lower. So can you explain that, please?
Yes, thank you, Peggy. Wow, you remember, this is great. So that actually, there was a big argument about this at the time when the threshold was increased to the current level, 3.25%. And that was a change that was implemented in 2014. And at the time, there was a former Hebrew political scientist, a very senior scholar of electoral politics called Avraham Diskin, together with another, she's not a political scientist, but the leader of the Kohelet Policy Institute, Moshe Kapel, well known in some Montreal circles. So they argued that it's actually not a good idea necessarily to have a high threshold if that creates an artificial reduction in the number of political parties and the political players who enter the Knesset. And that is actually what we are seeing. With the reduction in the number of political parties that we have seen and the lists that qualify for the Knesset, what also happens is that some of those parties that make it. And Avigdor Lieberman, who was the politician pushing for this electoral threshold, he understood the game very well. He understood that if there are fewer parties in the Knesset, his political party is going to have greater bargaining leverage because there are fewer possible coalitional combinations that the larger parties can form. And this is what Diskin and Kapel were trying to tell Netanyahu at the time. If you are leading the largest party, which Likud has been the largest party for the last couple of decades, what you want is a Knesset with several smaller political parties so that you would have a broader range of possible coalitions that you can pick and choose from. This is, by the way, exactly what allowed Ben-Gurion and Mapai to dominate Israeli politics for such a long time. The threshold was very low, 1%, 1.2%, 2%. And with many, many small political parties, back then there were several parties with just one seat. And then, of course, you can put together all kinds of different coalitions that it's much easier. But when the number of players is limited, then it's a much harder game. And the prospective coalition partners can drive a much harder bargain. And Lieberman knew that, he played that very well. And we saw how well Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked played that game also. I mean, he could become a prime minister with initially 7 and then 6 members of parliament for that reason. So that's the reason, Peggy.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Because I think we always think, like, why can't they get more stability? And okay, thank you. Okay, anybody have some questions? This is a big chance to ask Csaba.
So I have a question. So Csaba, you mentioned the Quebec election. So we have 3 parties that pretty much had the same votes, 13%, 14%. One got 21 seats, the other one got 11, 3 seats and 0 seats, and feel that it's an injustice. So that model, and then you have the Israeli model where you're having 5 elections every 6 months, or what country has the middle ground that you feel is not the ideal? There's no ideal system, but the most stable system to create majority governments.
Well, first of all, I have to start by saying, Simon, that if the division in a country is so deep politically, no institution is going to fix that. An institution can artificially force an outcome, but if the fundamental will is not there to work together, that just won't hold.
Right.
Now, having said that, look, it's also a truism in the literature on electoral reform and electoral systems that you need to think very hard before you change an electoral system, because electoral systems always have unexpected consequences. Electoral reformers go into the redesigning the system with one expected outcome, but there are always changes. Now, having said that, if the question is about a majority government, then, and obviously it's a parliamentary system that we are talking about, because semi-presidential systems have different dynamics. I think that the system that most people would hold up as an example is Germany, the German-style mixed electoral system, which Israel also studied. So it's an electoral system that has half of the parliament is made up by districts, like what we have in Canada, and the other half is made up by party list. But as Ariela Cutler would, and she was part of those conversations in the Knesset back in the day, several decades ago, when this electoral reform possibility was very strongly studied in Israel, it essentially collapsed because the difficulty, like the electoral geography, is just not conducive for the creation of districts. Like Israel is a very elongated country where it's very difficult to create meaningful districts. Like the Negev is very sparsely populated. Then you look at the metropolitan centers. And of course, electoral districting also has issues of gerrymandering. Where do you draw the boundaries? It's not easy, and for that reason it was abandoned. So I really don't think, Simon, that that has any kind of future in any serious discussion about electoral reform. I think that if there is that any kind of meaningful move towards electoral reform would have to be again, playing with the threshold, maybe finding a threshold that's more appropriately reflective of the nature of the division of the country. I mean, several of the lists that are making it into the Knesset today are not parties. They are forced lists that bring together several constituents just to make it above the threshold. And then there is no mechanism to force them to stay together after the Knesset election is over. So that's one problem.
Right.
And clearly, the last several years have shown us that the threshold is not in sync. It's too restricted. It's not in sync with the genuine division and multiplicity of voices that the country has.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
I have
So,
a question.
Yeah, please.
what?
Go ahead, Garit.
Oh, okay. Could you talk about the Lieberman and what's his role in this election, if at all?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Gurit. And I would like to say 2 points. First, like the other members of the Change Bloc, except for Naftali Bennett's party, which has disappeared for all intents and purposes, the other parties are trying more or less desperately to show and to run in this election in a retrospective fashion on their achievements, to show the voters what they have done. So as finance minister, Lieberman emphasized and keeps emphasizing the importance of having created a budget and also having made meaningful moves towards liberalizing the export-import relations of the country, and in particular the importing of basic food commodities into Israel, with the expectation that the prices are going to drop. And while that may be the case, the effect just doesn't seem to be there, because if you have been to Israel recently, I mean, inflation is running rampant, and certainly what you pay at the gas stations, what you pay in the grocery stores, I mean, the prices are just going up and up. So, but nonetheless, there is a record of having produced a budget, which is something that the Netanyahu government couldn't do before, and that's an important element of the Yisrael Beitenu campaign. Two, more important than that, and that message is becoming a little bit deflated in my reading of the campaign. Lieberman keeps projecting himself as, and this is what you see on his flyers and posters, I am the last barrier or maxim or obstacle before another Netanyahu comeback. So he is still running on this very strong anti-Netanyahu platform, but he's really the only member of the Change Bloc that does it so passionately and so exclusively. When you look at Benny Gantz, doesn't really talk much about Netanyahu, and pundits are seeing in it a covert message suggesting that maybe if the coalitional game unfolds in such a way, Benny Gantz may not be averse to becoming defense minister in a Netanyahu government. Lieberman is not. Lieberman is unequivocal, but he is really the only one that pushes that envelope so strongly. And Gurit, if I just may use your question to really stress this point, that the Rak Lo Bibi message that dominated the last 4 elections, that doesn't dominate the headlines anymore. That's not there. And that certainly also works in Netanyahu's favor. And of course, it cannot be there because now the Change Bloc that replaced Netanyahu in office, they are on the defensive. Now they are the government. They have a record to defend. So that changes the dynamics.
Great. Garit, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I'm so interested with Lieberman, and also Lieberman and Bibi. It's almost like a Greek tragedy. They were so close. They were bros. So now you see how lucky we are that we have Csaba. He's an invaluable resource. And so Csaba, thank you so much. And also, we're very lucky because Csaba was in town for this and will be in town for our November 2nd after Munich screening, where he